it was like a transformation in my life and totally changed the way I looked at a lot of things, and also the empowerment that I felt.
To Aim in Practice, where I have the immense pleasure of sitting down with a diverse array of practitioners, experts, and authors. And together we are going to delve into their unique journeys and insights and explore this multifaceted world of wellness and, of course, life as a practitioner. I'm your host, Jess Reynolds, and today you are going to hear my conversation with Michelle Oravitz. Now, Michelle is an acupuncturist, an Ayurvedic practitioner, and the founder of Wholesome Fertility Method. We're going to be exploring her inspiring journey from architecture to acupuncture, which is driven by her personal health struggles and a passion for natural medicine.
It takes about 3 months for the eggs to really respond, because it takes 3 months for eggs to mature.
Now, throughout our discussion, Michelle shares how her own health journey led her to discover the power of acupuncture, not just for what she was dealing with, which was menstrual irregularities, but for overall well-being. We dive into the specifics of how traditional Chinese medicine can be used to promote balance and fertility, and the importance of giving our body the time it needs to respond to these natural treatments.
Another misconception, if we're talking about that, is that 35 and older is advanced maternal age. When I see 35, I think really young, honestly, from my perspective.
We also explore some common misconceptions about fertility treatments and things like maternal age, bringing a fresh perspective to what it means to pursue parenthood later in life.
But it was basically saying, if you are doing something that you're meant to do and that is aligned with your absolute purpose, it doesn't feel like work. It actually makes you feel more alive.
And we touch on the profound aspect of our inner lives, aligning with our purpose. Michelle shares her journey to finding her true calling and how it has not only enhanced her life, but also allowed her to profoundly impact the lives of others. She offers her perspectives on how holistic practices, which includes acupuncture and hypnotherapy, can help us find that sense of peace and security, and how these practices are truly transformative, both practitioner and client. So let's jump right into this conversation and explore these ideas in depth. Alright, so before we jump into today's episode, I want to chat about switching to a new EMR system. Now, our podcast partner Jane knows it can feel like an overwhelming process to switch EMRs. But while sticking with your current software might feel less daunting, moving to the right software, well, it can have a ton of benefits. So here are 3 things to consider before making this switch. Engage your team. Initiating early discussions with your team is important for addressing questions and concerns and ensuring that everyone is aligned with the goals of the move. Assess the resources. Explore software that offers onboarding resources for a variety of learning styles to help your team feel comfortable with the new workflows at their own pace. And evaluate technical support. Consider the level of support that the software offers. Is it unlimited? Can you get help on weekends? Are there any added costs after onboarding? If you're interested in learning more, book a personalized demo at jane.app/switch. And if you decide to make the switch, don't forget to use the code AIM1MO at sign up to receive a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Michelle, thank you very much for taking the time to chat. I'm looking forward to wherever this conversation might take us, but I'd like to begin with a little bit of a backstory. As I was reading through your website and learning a little bit more about you before this recording, I discovered that you once were an architect and then you switched from architecture into acupuncture and complementary medicine. Now, I find that super interesting because just on a personal level, if I could turn back time, I probably would go to school for architecture. I think about it all the time. So I'm curious about how your story unfolds and how you made the transition from architecture into what you're doing now.
Yeah, so definitely a long story. When I went into architecture, I was always into design and I wanted to do something creative. And I initially got into interior design. Then I said, architecture, I could do both. I could do outside, inside, it really opens up a lot more. So the creativity aspect was not so creative once, I got into the real world. And then I got into the corporate world and in New York City. So as you know, it could be a lot of hours and stress, and definitely didn't feel very aligned with my energy once I got in tune with my energy, and I went to acupuncture. And the reason I found an acupuncturist was because I was dealing with my own menstrual cycle irregularities really since the time that I got my period at age 13. So I had irregularities. No doctor was really able to help unless I took the birth control pill, and that was like the only solution that I was given. So many years I really didn't understand natural medicine. The one thing that I did have, I was always intrigued by natural medicine naturally, just like because it was interesting to me. And the one person that really intrigued me and got this into my mind is my grandmother. My grandmother used to talk to me about natural remedies when I was younger, and I was always intrigued. And I remember looking for books, and at the time it wasn't as like common to see natural remedies books unless I wasn't looking right, but it was harder to find like in bookstores and when I was much younger. And so later on, I would dabble, look into it. Actually bought an acupressure book while I was doing architecture, and eventually found my first acupuncturist. And this is like, we're talking over 12 to 13 years of irregular periods. So like nothing was working for me. And I went to an acupuncturist, and he was the only solution that regulated my period. But then I found that in so doing, I went for one thing, but then I started feeling better in other ways. And it helped me not only with my menstrual cycle, but it helped me just like how I felt, my sleep, my skin. And just, I noticed also the stress that I used to have at work would just roll off my back much easier. So it's like that flow that we get taught in Chinese medicine, like when we learn Chinese medicine. So basically that was the first taste that I had to natural medicine, like where I was really immersed. And it was the first taste that I had to the idea that there is another solution. And much of the mainstream, sometimes in certain circumstances, they don't really understand everything. And that was like the first time I was like, wow, this is crazy. But like, I was told there is no solution, period. And there was a solution that I didn't even know existed, but I think somewhere in my intuition, like I knew something else was there. And so that just blew me away. It was like a transformation in my life and totally changed the way I looked at a lot of things, and also the empowerment that I felt. And I said, you know what, this is something that I want to do. I want to learn more. I really want to get like into this. So I started out with Ayurvedic medicine, and then eventually, it took me many years to make that decision because it's a big decision to make, to change your career. And then also like the money wise and having to, align everything. And then studied Ayurveda. Then eventually when my kids got older, went back to school for architecture, acupuncture, but it's like architecture of the body, I call it.
Yeah.
And then, and so basically, I did that. And then because it was such a personal thing, and like, I know that had I not gone to an acupuncturist, I probably would have had reproductive issues myself. And because you need to know when you're ovulating, you need to have a normal cycle, or it's very, very hard. Even if you do ovulate, I don't know, every couple of months, it's very difficult to know exactly what's going on. And I probably had underlying PCOS that was not diagnosed looking back, but it was not something that I noticed. But look, now, ever since I've gone, I've been completely regular. And so now it's kind of like sparked a passion of mine to help women and couples, but mostly women, because most women contact me. And so it's been the most rewarding thing ever, working with fertility.
Thank you. I always love hearing the backstories of practitioners, how they got into them, because they're all different, but there tends to be a couple themes that I've picked up at this point. And there's the theme of, I wasn't doing well myself. I went to this practitioner. It made a huge difference, and I fell in love, right? And then other ones are just like, my family did it. And there's a couple themes, but I really, really appreciate the intimate firsthand experience of going through the process of healing and then dedicating one's life to it. So thank you. I'm grateful for you sharing. And I'm curious, as you were going through your education, did you already know what you wanted to do? Like when you were in school, were you already thinking, I want to get into fertility. I want to work with women's health? Or was it something that sort of evolved after you started practicing?
It's funny that you asked that. I don't know that I was going to say that I'm going to specialize in that specifically, but every single time we were given a project to do in school, or like PowerPoint that we're supposed to present with cases and studies, it was always fertility or menstrual cycle. It was just kind of like I was gravitated towards that. And when there was a
Fascinating.
fertility case, I would want to work on it. Like if somebody would come in because we had a clinic, and I was like, oh my God, that I want to work on this. And I ended up having a few friends who got pregnant and always wanted to work with me. So I do work also with women that are pregnant, because a lot of them are my clients that were trying to conceive and got pregnant. So it's interesting how I was gravitated, but they were gravitated towards working with me as well. So it was kind of like, it just felt like synchronicity and like flow, in that direction.
Love it. I love it. When I was going through school, every once in a while, I shouldn't say every once in a while, I think it was my third year, second year, I can't remember, but in one of those years, I don't know what the universe had in mind, but the universe was like, "Hey, Jess, we're going to give you nothing but menopause and perimenopausal women." So that's like all I treated for an entire year of my school, and it was at that moment when I'm like, I don't want to do this at all. Like my feeling towards gynecology and women's health, as far as treating, I just wasn't good at it. I didn't enjoy it. So hearing the opposite story really makes me happy. It's like, as practitioners, listening to that thing is super important. Because if I had have just been like, okay, well, I'm pretty good at this, I can do it relatively successfully, and I'm seeing a lot of it, getting better at it, I might as well do that. That would be a detriment, certainly to me, but much more importantly, in my opinion, to the clients that would come and see me, as opposed to seeing somebody like yourself, where you're just like, I'm pulled, dude, I'm gravitate. I love the idea of it. That's awesome.
Yeah, you definitely need
Thank
to
you.
have
Yeah.
like an energy rich relationship with whatever it is that you're doing. Because if you don't, there's a constriction. It's like
Mhm.
almost a chi block, you know, for your
Yeah.
ability or your purpose, really,
Yeah.
to help.
Hmm. Yeah. And I know clients can feel it. I know they can. I mean, I think after a person starts practicing, they attract their ideal client more and more, because when you see, like for yourself, when you see somebody who's dealing with fertility issues, you're probably like just so in it, like present and engaged and enjoying it, versus seeing a client that isn't your ideal client. Or, I myself, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm here, I'm present, but not super engaged. And I know the client feels that level of engagement. Now, with that transition that you made, going from architecture into to acupuncture, you said it was a relatively long process, a lot of steps involved, starting with Ayurveda. And I'm curious, for people who might be listening who are considering making a transition. A lot of my listeners are, say, massage therapists, and tons of them are interested in shifting into something like acupuncture. What advice or what ideas do you have about making that career transition into something that is, in the example I gave, semi-related, but nevertheless a pretty significant career transition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, myself, I would go to acupuncturists, get treatments, and because the one that I was in New York, the one that I absolutely loved wasn't near me because I moved to Florida at that point. So I would go to lots of, a couple of different ones, and I would ask them questions. I was like so intrigued. What does this do? What does that do? And I would just like watch them and experience what it was that they were doing. And then I also read a couple of books. There's a lot of great introductory books. The Web That Has No Weaver. There's some. I believe there was one, Heaven and Earth, and it's been so long, but it's
Yeah, between heaven and
basically
earth. Yeah.
Between Heaven and Earth. Yeah. So those are great if you don't know anything about Chinese medicine. You're just really curious. And the thing with Chinese medicine that I find so amazing is that it's so intuitive that it really speaks to and kind of teaches. This is why it never goes out of style. Like it's been around
Hmm.
for so many thousands of years and it still doesn't go out of style. The reason is because it bases a lot of what it teaches on nature. And we are part of nature. There is a part of us that recognizes truth with the teachings. There's a part of us that understands those patterns. It makes sense. because that's who we are. We're built from that same
Mhm.
design. So I find that really fascinating. So like when you do read about it, it makes sense. I mean, the yin and the yang being in everything, and like just the elements and
Mhm.
how that can impact how you feel, and everybody having different elements. You could be like freezing cold. The next person next to you is like so hot. They're in their tank top. Like, why is that? They have different, almost different weather systems that we have like within our bodies.
Mhm. Yeah, I love it. Love it. And I totally agree. I mean, as you were describing that, I was actually kind of getting goosebumps. Not the cold part, but just your description of how intuitive it is and how it really is. The entire system is simply observation. If you can observe nature, you can understand disease, you can understand pathology. Yeah, I really appreciate that part, and also how it doesn't go out of style. It hasn't, and it certainly ebbs and flows in its popularity throughout history, largely for political reasons. But the fact that it is still around and largely being practiced in the same way, I think, is absolutely fascinating.
Hmm.
And the other thing I really like about it is it seems to have an answer for everything, right? Like as you said, why is it that you're sitting there just sweating and the person next to you is shivering? And TCM has a pretty good answer for it. And at times the answer could be relatively complicated, but I find more often than not, you go back to the basic principles and it's answered. And
Hmm.
on that,
Yeah.
I'm curious if we could explore sort of the idea of TCM and fertility, sort of your wheelhouse, right? Really describing um, when you are practicing and you're seeing clients coming in for fertility. I mean, I don't want to assume, but I'm going to. My assumption is a lot of them have been through the system. They've been to a lot of different specialists, or they've been trying for a long time, and they've probably talked to Dr. Google on and off for years, right? So, what do you think some of the most common misconceptions are for people that are coming to see you about fertility or women's health in general?
Do you mean in general before they come see me? Like, one of the things that I'll say is that they think that IVF is a guarantee, because there's this
Mm,
perception that, oh, I have the lab, they have the labs, they could basically make it happen. So it's like they, there's this misconception, I'm paying this money, I gotta have an outcome, you know, and it's not necessarily truth. As a matter of fact, some people, and especially people of advanced maternal age, don't do as well with IVF. They do better naturally. And sometimes that could be, they can go through a few miscarriages before they get the baby, that's a healthy baby. And it's all about really focusing on egg quality. But that's something that I find, is a huge misconception. Another one is, I'm running out of time, I need to get pregnant now, or I'm going to lose all my eggs, if they're going close to 40. And I think another misconception, if we're talking about that, is that 35 and older is advanced maternal age. When I see 35, I think really young, honestly, from my perspective. And
mm,
so I think that people think, oh, in a month I better do it now because I'm going to like lose my eggs. And it's actually better to, if you're implementing supplements, diet, protocols, acupuncture, and you're shifting things, which is typically what I'll do when I start working with people. It's not just about acupuncture, it's about a lot of things. So once we do that, and it also gets customized per person. So once you do that, it takes about 3 months for the eggs to really respond, because it takes 3 months for eggs to mature. So within that time, you're getting all those nutrients, but then sometimes more than 3 months, because we're working, say, on digestive issues. And even if they're getting the nutrients, if they're not able to absorb it, there's many layers to this, so that it takes a little time. But what happens is, if you give it that time, but it's productive time, so you're not just pausing to pause, you're actually pausing to feed your body what it needs to really enrich the energy, the chi, the life force, then you're actually increasing your battery, so that your body's able to reproduce. Because ultimately, the reality is that reproduction is not the body's first priority, survival is. And so when you give it extra energy, then it's able to use and harness that energy and that blood to reproduce. So to take a little time is much better if you're using it in the right way and you're productive with it, than to rush into something and just kind of, let's just try to do this now, because ultimately you don't want a miscarriage. You want to, like, I always can compare it to like prepping the soil when you're starting a beautiful garden. And if you don't prep that soil and you don't give it what it needs and add the nutrients, take out the weeds, really get it so that it's optimal, then it's going to impact your garden.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that analogy. And as you were describing the process, that same analogy popped into my mind, right? Going back to the Taoist TCM nature brain. Um, and one thing I'm curious about, if we could maybe dive into a little bit, is this idea of compliance, right? So clients come in, they're dealing with an issue that is obviously very important to them. I'm sure many of them, right? And the solution is, okay, come and see me, and we're going to do some work while you're here, right? We'll do some acupuncture, we'll talk a little bit, but the bulk of it is what the person is doing at home, right? Are they taking the herbs if you prescribe herbs, right? Are they actually doing the dietary changes? Are they finding ways to manage their stress? It sounds like there's a lot of things involved in this overall fertility process. How do you get people to really be compliant and actually follow through and not just kind of put it on you as, hey, Michelle, I'm here. You're the one. Make my soil fertile. Do the work for me. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, how do you deal with compliance?
That's a great question. It's not always easy, and sometimes, but here's what I do. I realize that in the beginning, I have a lot of asks, so I try to do it piecemeal. I do work virtually the first time because I like to really have a conversation and not rush to doing the treatment. I really like to get to know the person, and building rapport is huge. Understanding the patient, really understanding their language, what is important for them, what's not important for them. So sometimes I'll have people who over exercise, for example. And so it's not like they have a problem with discipline. They're great. They know exactly what they want to do and they really want to make sure that everything's like done. But there was this common misconception, I think, that has sort of stayed with us culturally, that the more you work out, the better it is for your body. And that's like, you can't overdo it. But when it comes to balance and fertility health, you can overdo it and you can underdo it too. It's all important is just to have a good balance. So sometimes I'll get resistance with that. That's like one of the big things that I get resistance with. So I work with them and I tell them, listen, I hear you. I understand you. I've been there. Like, I also loved my hot yoga. And like, sometimes I can't always do that because it depletes my yin, So I explain to them, like, in some cases, how certain things can impact, but then we work on anchoring new habits to old habits. This is something that I kind of learned when I was doing hypnotherapy as well. Anchoring new habits to old habits. So if you're already like getting up in the morning and you're doing something and you want to anchor a new one, then right after that, say you want to do breath work or a little meditation. If you're already having your tea time in the morning, then right around the tea time, just add a little 5 minutes and then anchor this new behavior. When you're removing something, you want something instead of that. So you don't want to completely create a void. You want to give a substitution. So, for example, if somebody likes their desserts, then you can go to like fruits, or dates or something different that's similar, and then eventually weaning that, because sometimes that could be too much too. Or with exercise, they feel like they need that extra exercise and they want to work really hard. Sometimes I'll add some breath work that they can do, because one of the reasons people feel so relaxed is because they're working their diaphragm. And it calms the nervous system. So like using other ways instead. So like other types of exercises or weaning them, so that I'll work with them in a way that's not too much of a shock to their system. And then sometimes when it comes to food, sometimes I'll use the ear if they have cravings. I'll do auricular. Auricular is amazing. It really gets into the psyche, and it really is incredible. It can like work the nervous system really well. So that's something that I found. And it hones in on a different level than just like our regular meridians.
Yeah. There were sort of two things there that I would love to explore when it comes to compliance, because I'm always after the relatively low hanging fruit. Like, what are the easiest things that we can do to have the most outsized effect? Now, in my experience, well, this isn't necessarily easy, but it's one of the best things is hypnotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
I also have my hypnotherapy training, and honestly, when people say, "What was the best thing you learned when you were in school for acupuncture?" and I say hypnotherapy, and they say that was
Mm-hmm.
part of it, and I said, "No, I took it. I did them at the same time because I don't know why. There was a compulsion." But genuinely, one of the most helpful things I have learned in my entire career and practice is learning hypnotherapy
Mm-hmm.
because of the way it teaches you to speak and how it teaches you how to interact and communicate with deeper parts of the psyche. So if you're open to it, could we maybe explore just a little bit how you incorporate hypnotherapy into your practice?
Yes, absolutely. So, first things first, when you start to talk to a person, it's your first time. You start to build rapport, and there's many different ways to do it. And it almost sounds like you're manipulating them, but you're really not, because the ultimate goal is to help. And so you listen to their predicates. Predicates are basically, it gives you an idea of the person's audio or their visual or their, if they like sense kinetic. And you really understand their language, but it doesn't just stop there. It could be somebody who's into sports or is into, whatever it is, traveling. So then you can use ideas when you're trying to explain to them. Like, say you're going to a new country and you speak in their language that they prefer, and it all
Hmm.
starts by listening, and then you can also mirror. And if they talk really loud, you start to amp your energy so that they can feel, okay, you're with them on the same level, and you make this connection. I love this analogy, or like this visual. Have you ever seen Avatar?
Oh yeah,
I feel like everybody's seen that. It's such an amazing. I
yeah.
feel like that's actually a channeled work. That's my it just feels like there's a channeling of sorts. It's very mystical and spiritual.
Hmm.
And so when they connect with the dragon, the dragon's all over the place, but then they kind of like
Hmm.
connect with the dragon. They put their hair piece into the dragon, and there's that connection, and then it's like it soars. So I feel the
Hmm.
same thing when you're working with somebody. You have to make that
Yeah.
connection. And so by doing that, you really need to listen to them and be there for
Yeah.
them. And one of the biggest things that I'm going to say, you might know what you might think the best thing for them, and you might really know, like, what they should eat, what they should do. However, it's really important to validate their reality. So if their reality is not where your reality is quite yet, it's really important to validate their reality, and do not challenge their reality. If they're really, really strong, you have to feel it out. And then over time, it might take a little while until they get used to you, until you can drop a couple of little hints and ease them into it. You're much better off doing that than to shock them and then say, I'm like, I know better for you, or anything like that as a practitioner.
Hmm.
So that's a big thing, is like challenging people's reality. If it's close to your reality, then fine. You can kind of mention a couple of things and you get a feel for it, but to challenge them right on, they're gonna resist, and they're not gonna feel. You're gonna break rapport, basically.
Hmm. Hmm. I really appreciate that. I mean, you've brought rapport up a number of times, and my experience is the same thing. I mean, a huge part of my practice is just building trust, building rapport. So then, when I do say something, give advice, suggest something, they're
Hmm.
much more likely to be like, I genuinely believe that this guy has my best interest at heart. So I
Yeah.
value that advice, and I too agree that hypnotherapy is a school of thought that provides a lot of tools to build
Oh
rapport.
yeah.
I think a
There's another
misconception a
tool,
lot of people
actually.
have. Yeah, yeah.
I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say
Sorry.
there's another tool is reframing. So sometimes people will
Mm,
say, I'm just not the kind of person that likes to sleep. Um, or whatever. It could be something where and you recognize a limited belief when you see one, and you're saying, well, just because you haven't doesn't mean that you're always going to be like. Or I say, like, your past doesn't necessarily predict your future, but then I'll kind of reframe things and say, oh, well, maybe this is something you needed that taught you, or however it is, to reframe it so that it doesn't feel like this absolute trap that they're always going to have, or like basically a life sentence.
Yeah. You know, as you were describing that, what popped in is in our original email exchange, you were telling me that you were at a Joe Dispenza workshop. I love that guy. Like, oof, big time, big time. Like, you just, I think, required reading for most people, if only there was just a short and concise version of it. But
Yes.
I think that there's just so much to this idea of reframing and identity changing, and what's involved in really evaluating these self statements that I am this type of person, and just believing that that's that's who I am. I'm lazy. That's who I am. Always have been lazy. My dad was lazy and my grandpa was lazy, so therefore and really helping people understand that these statements are not necessarily well, in fact they aren't definitive, but a challenging thing that I think a lot of practitioners encounter is, unless an individual is a counselor or a psychologist, then there's just like there's miles and acres of gray area when we're talking about these kind of semi-coaching things that we do and talking about mentality and mental states. What do you do in your practice to sort of ensure that you are giving the best help possible with all of these very legitimately powerful tools without crossing any scope of practice lines or anything like that?
So do you mean about, I'm talking about like identity and things like that, like, and the power of the
Yeah.
mind?
Mm-hmm.
So I use a lot of studies. I like to use a lot of studies because I feel like sometimes I'll have more scientific people, and then sometimes I'll have more spiritual people, and then sometimes I have in between. Even if it's more spiritual people, I do think that people benefit from hearing studies. I use one for visualizations where they had a group of uh, athletes who were, I think it was like long range basketball throwing, and one group was imagining that they were doing that. The other group practiced every day. So it was like 30 minutes of imagining, 30 minutes of practicing. And then the third group did nothing. They were the control group. And so the difference between the people who practiced and the control group that did nothing was about, I'm guessing here from my memory, about 30%, if I remember correctly. But it was like a significant amount of improvement after doing this for a month. And then the second group, which was just imagining doing this every single day, there was almost like a 2% difference between the ones that practiced and the ones that imagined. And they were like also
Mm-hmm.
significantly better than the ones that did nothing. So that's pretty fascinating. So I do like to kind of bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes I'll have them do an exercise of imagining a lemon, and I'll kind of walk them through it. And I'm like, did you salivate? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, why did you salivate? You didn't really eat a lemon. Like, you had a physiological response to a thought. So they're like, oh my God, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay. So there, so to have a person experience it rather than just kind of like talk at them, that's one thing. But another thing is also feeling out where the person is in their reality. If they are completely
Mm.
only science based, I will give them only science based things until, maybe they'll be open a little bit, but I'm not going to shock them with a different reality at all, especially not the first day.
No, I certainly appreciate that. I like that it's kind of use stories and examples, use a little bit of science here and there, essentially on a lot of education, teaching clients. I think that's, in my opinion, one of the most empowering things we can do is provide education. So using studies, I really appreciate that. So maybe let's veer back to this idea of fertility and women's health. One of the reasons that I originally reached out to you is a former student of mine. She sent me a text message and was like, "Hey, I'm really interested in." She's a fresh grad, right? And she's like, "I'm really interested in getting into fertility. What do you suggest?" And I'm like, "I don't know, right? I don't really have any good suggestions other than see if you can find somebody." So then she sent me a link, and I took a look at what you do, right? Um, and not just like what you do clinically within your wellness center, but also in this program that you have. And the program is the Wholesome Fertility Method. And as I was looking into this, I got really excited because it seems like such an amazing program for people who are interested in either learning more or maybe even specializing in fertility in women's health. Can you maybe dig into that a little bit, or what would be the first steps that a practitioner of any type could take if they're interested in working more with fertility in women's health?
Yeah, so for the program itself, they would fill out an application form, and then I'll read it obviously and reach back out. But this was born from my own struggles in deciding to specialize after graduating from school and like doing lots of pain cases and, more of the general like acupuncture. And I started wanting to work with that. And then I had clients coming in, and then one person would talk about PCOS. The other one would talk about the IVF process. And then other people would say, oh, I'm reading this book. It starts with an egg. So like, I'll just keep learning and learning and learning. And this is what I was doing. And then one person comes with endometriosis, and I was like, oh my gosh, every time I think that I'm actually learning this, I'm finding out more. So I started to basically keep organized, and I put all of my information together. And I wanted to also know about the supplements, because a lot of times we don't learn that in Chinese medicine. We learn more about herbs. So supplements are actually really important. And I didn't realize this, especially if you're working with people that are doing IVF, because they're using medication that is meant to control the hormonal system. It's really important to not mix herbs with that, because herbs can get in the way and impact the hormonal system. So we really have to do other things and then rely on supplements. And the supplements are important because they can work on egg quality or uterine lining, depending on where they're at or what they need. So then I started to get into that, and then I understood gut health is really important for it. So there's just so many different aspects to it. So I decided to create a program, and then I had a couple of people that signed up on it. So it was kind of like my initial beta, group. And then I took them through a Q&A, and we created, I was basically building it. And it started out with really that building rapport and getting to know your client, and specifically in this niche, because it's a very unique one. A lot of people go through PTSD, and it's very difficult to go through the fertility journey. A lot of loss happens. A lot of times they have to go through like money. It's costly with the IVF process. So it's a very difficult thing to go through, like road to really be on. So part of it was to help practitioners like me, like how I would have wanted, basically all the mistakes that I had made or all the things that I wish I would have known. This is what I was creating it for. But then it sort of morphed into also a fertility coaching certification. So then I talked to my lawyer, and I kind of figured out, can I make this certification program? And then I eventually got it accredited. So then it was just like all these different kind of parts. And it sort of was like, okay, well, a person can come into this if they just want to be a fertility coach, and or they are a practitioner and want to specialize in it, or both. You could do both. So what I do is in person, I have my place, my brick and mortar, where people come in, and I am an acupuncture physician. So I'm able to help them like physically, do acupuncture. And then I also coach them as well. But then, as you know, across state lines, I don't have my license. So then I'm a fertility coach. So I work really internationally. People can call from like England and different countries. And then I help them online. So it's like I never meet them in person, but I'm giving them tons of information that's unique and customized for their needs. So that's basically what this program can provide, which is huge, because after the pandemic, I realized, just even as a business, you cannot rely on just one source and one method of your business, which for me was brick and mortar, and I had to shut that down. In Florida, luckily, it was only 2 months that we shut down, but it was definitely a wake up call that there are other aspects, and you want to continue helping people and you want to continue doing things. So now I have almost like this 2-part business where I'm in person, but I'm also virtual. And I think that aspect of it alone is a game changer, because it opens you up to helping more people, and then it helps your business continue and not rely on just one source.
I'm really curious about this fertility coaching, and part of the reason is so many of the practitioners that I work with, they're not acupuncturists. I work with a lot of yoga teachers, yoga therapists, nutritionists, osteopaths, a lot of massage therapists. So there are all these other modalities, and one thing that I hear from so many of them is they're interested in something additional, not necessarily to switch careers, right? But they're interested in something else. So can we maybe dig into this very specific idea of coaching? I just want to make sure I'm very clear. So the coaching program you have, is it kind of just for anybody who's interested in helping people with fertility? So just a general, you don't have to be an acupuncturist. You can be a massage therapist and still take the coaching program. Is that the idea?
Correct. I have such a range of students, and all the way from like people who do like abdominal work, and specifically like a Maya abdominal technique, and then there's some that are nurses that were working with an OB and they decided they wanted to work more specifically with fertility, or people that have zero training. They're like in the business field and they went through their own fertility journey and they just decided, why not empower myself and also empower other people at the same time, and decided to take it, or people that just were interested in it, or doulas. I mean, it's such a range, but basically they get the tools to create their own fertility business, like online coaching business. And with that, I also have like a bonus marketing, because you can have all the information in the world, but if people don't know you exist, how to approach podcasters and things like that to get your name out there. So I definitely like looked at it and as the whole range, because it's not just important to have the information, and the information includes understanding labs as well, things like that. And it's not to diagnose. And I'm very clear on that. And I always say that in the beginning, I actually also provide legal templates that they can go and get, just to show that you're not giving medical advice, get that all clear, create contracts for coaching. There's many templates out there, like bundles that people can get. So I refer them. I give them all the resources basically to start really from scratch. And
that's super cool. That is super exciting.
It's important, right? Because everybody's afraid. They're
like,
like,
I know
what
the
can
process
I say? What
that
can't
goes
I
into
say?
Sorry.
No, I know. And so, so one of the things too is understanding the labs. It's not that you are going to read the labs for them. However, you might say, go back to your doctor and get a full thyroid panel, not just the TSH. And that understanding it, or say the TSH seems like it might be high for fertility. How about you ask your doctor or go get a second opinion? And so you're basically telling them to rely on the doctor, but because you have knowledge, you can advocate for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. That's so exciting. It really sounds like an amazing and very comprehensive program. So thank you for putting that together. And I'm curious with what you've built. Like I know you're likely a very busy person. You've got your own private practice and you've got your coaching clients, and now you've got this coaching program. What do you kind of envision this becoming? If you can, like wave your magic wand and be in the future, what does it turn into? What's the big beautiful vision?
You mean just everything that I do?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the near future, I'm working on finishing a book. So it's really on the completion. It's on the proofreading stage. So the book is going to come out soon. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, I do know to some extent, but then I also allow the universe to dream up something for me. But I do love having the online, the courses. I really love teaching. I really do. I mean, teaching is a lot of fun for me. I really enjoy it. So that's something that I love doing. And then I love also being in person. So I kind of like this hybrid model. of having both. So I have really one-to-one connection with my patients in person, and then also having the other aspect or the creativity, because that's how architecture started, was the creativity. So I do like the creative aspect of running an online business, because it is creative. You come up with ideas and stories and different things. So that's and even creating courses is creative, so, and I like also working with other professionals. So I do, one of the things that I offer with my program that we're talking about is I do also include, if people want, as an add-on, coaching. So then I really go into detail. So I go into detail, I audit their website, I help them really like craft a whole business program or online program. So that's fun for me. I actually really enjoy doing that. And it's actually something that scares a lot of people to do for their own, but I really enjoy it. And then my daughter, who's in school for film, she's amazing at websites and she's pretty inexpensive. So a lot of times she'll end up helping them craft their website and make it look gorgeous. So that's fun.
That's amazing. Yeah. As I learn more and more about all of these different things you've got on the go, I think like you and I have some similarities. Entrepreneurs with many different hats that we wear on a daily basis. So one thing I'm curious about, as a person who does have so much, well, what it sounds like so much on the go, and reflecting on this idea that we were discussing a little bit earlier about maintaining balance and sort of what we do in our own lives in order to make sure not just our fertility soil, but the soil of our life is really fertile and ripe for growth. What do you do yourself to sort of balance all of these different things, but then also keep yourself energized and healthy enough that you can continue to treat clients and to help other practitioners?
I spend a lot of time with my family. I don't really let the business aspect get in the way of my family. I like to really give them my one-on-one time. So I have it in person. I'll be honest, doing so much is exciting for me because I like that balances me. If I was only in person, I was only online, I would get bored. So that for me is fun. And I go to Dr. Joe Dispenza retreats. I do meditation. I do yoga. Like I get myself a massage once a week. I'll acupuncture myself. And if I can, I'll do a trade with somebody, and I eat healthy and I take care of my body and I think positive. I think that my positive thought process is one of the things that gets me going.
How do you fit it all in? Because I love this idea of doing all the things you do, and I do basically the same thing. But one question I get from a lot of people that don't have a couple businesses and that are just, maybe they've got their practice and they've got their family, is they look at somebody like yourself, and you've got all these different businesses and these things you do, and you keep yourself healthy, you meditate, you eat right, you do a lot of things. I think for some people it can sound like, how do you even do that? How do you find enough time in the day to do it? What's sort of your secret to actually doing all of this?
Organize systems. That's it. It's so easy. If you have a ton of stuff, I mean, people live in New York City and they can like organize a whole space, like just a ton of stuff with just systems. If they have a place for every single thing, then it goes well. I mean, you could say like maybe Monday I'm only filming, if you're doing that, or podcasting or whatever. So if I podcast, I batch. I just put it all there. If for my social media, that's one thing too. Like I've tried handing that over to people, but it's such a creative thing that I enjoy controlling it. So I batch. I have a system. Every Monday is one thing, every Tuesdays, so I have a whole calendar set out. Sometimes I do it like in a day or two for the whole month, and then I schedule it. So then that's kind of like in the background. And then I have my schedule in person. I only go 2 times a week. And then I have a third day where I have my associate come in. And sometimes I'll open a third day if need be, but I can see 3 to 4 patients an hour. So I could easily see up to 15 a day within a couple of hours. It's really not like anything crazy. So I have a system. it works like a
Mm-hmm.
clock. I mean, there's a system, and then I allocate my exercise in the morning or the afternoon, depending on the day. I'm like, that is a non-negotiable. I got to do my yoga. And then I have a class, that like a little more strengthening class, and that's like a non-negotiable for me. That is something that I have to do. And then my meditation is a non-negotiable. And that's it. I mean, it's all about organization. When you feel overwhelmed, ask yourself, how organized am I? If you come up with a
Mm-hmm.
plan and say, I'm allocating X amount of this and that in a certain time, you will do that. There's something called the Parkinson's law. It's not Parkinson's, the disease. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah. Oh,
Yes. So if
I
you
talk about it
say,
all the time.
oh, you do. Okay. So if I say, it'll feel like, okay, you give a container to anybody and you can fill to that container. If you say, I am going to,
Mm-hmm.
like, just no deadline at all, then it's going to go into the infinity and it's just going to constantly run in the background like an app. If you say, this is allocated towards these 2 hours and I have to finish by then, you will finish by then. So we have incredible potential as humans to get stuff done if we need to. And so when you do that and you just allocate it to that time, that's when you're managing your time. When you manage your time, you're managing your energy. And that's that. That's just that easy.
Yeah. You're talking my language for sure, for sure. I could happily just talk about productivity tips. I don't know why, but maybe it's something weird about me. But I find that when I am feeling anxious, when I'm feeling worked up, and it really doesn't matter what is causing that, if I just sit down with my schedule and look at it, I'm like, oh, okay. I feel
Yeah.
okay because it's organized. I can see it and I
Yeah.
could be like, wait, there's nothing to worry about. I've got a time and a place for literally everything. There's nothing to stress about. Everything's good. It's on books. Like it's such a calming thing for my nervous
Yeah.
system
Yeah.
to
Because
take
it
the time to do
feels
that and
less
set.
overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. So I've got a question to ask you that I ask virtually every single guest on the podcast. It's this pretty deep curiosity I have. Now, as an individual who is both a successful practitioner and one that, from the sounds of it, has seen many different practitioners. And of course, success means something different to every different practitioner and every different field and modality. But what do you think creates a successful practitioner, or what makes a practitioner successful?
That is a really good question. I believe that if you're able to visualize what you have in mind for the person and you're able to, how well you can execute that and translate it into the outcome of the person. And it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly how you planned it, but it has to some extent, create or evoke some kind of vitality or like transformation in the person that you're working with. Because I do think that when they feel that and they feel heard and they feel like more alive or like a sense of quality of life, even that alone can change. Not it really has a ripple effect. I'll say that, because it changes their life, but it's also going to change the life of the people around them. And a lot of that is not something that can be measured or seen, like with your actual eyes. It's something that can be felt, and you can feel
Mhm.
almost like a shift in a person. And I've seen that before. People have like lost weight or started eating healthier. It's like their whole they're like a different person. And it's kind of like an upgrade. I feel like Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this a lot, but it's like an upgrade, a biological upgrade. And I think that when you're aligned as a person, I remember one of my teachers always said, work on your chi. It's the most important thing you can do. So I suggest to the practitioners, meditate, work on your own energy, because it's always going to reflect on the people that you're working with. And that's one of the best ways you can really relay that energy rich vibration.
Mhm. That's beautiful. I love it. I love it. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Now, as we draw our conversation to a close, is there anything else you would like to say to any listeners? Anything that we kind of left unaddressed?
No, that was a really good conversation. You asked great questions. You're a great interviewer, I have to say.
Thank
And it
you.
was really good questions that got me thinking too. I was like, oh, this is a really good question. But I guess the biggest thing is aligning with your purpose. Like when you really align with your purpose, I always say, like, if you work the right job, you never have to work another day in your life. I mean, it's not my saying, it's a quote, but and I probably butchered it, but it was basically saying if you are doing something that you're meant to do and that is aligned with your absolute
Yeah.
purpose, it doesn't feel like work. It actually makes you feel more alive. And so for me, all this stuff sounds like it would be overwhelming, but it's not for me. It gives me life. So I think that when you find
Mhm.
something that gives you life, you're on the right path.
Yeah. I think that's great, and what I think is so cool about what you just said is at the very beginning of this discussion, when I asked you about your shift from architecture into medicine, the first thing you said is architecture felt a little out of alignment, and now we're finishing the conversation with you saying the most important thing is checking into your alignment. I really think that's a beautiful place to tie a little bow on our conversation. So, thank you so much for your time. This was an amazing conversation. I'm very grateful for it.
Well, thank you so much, Jess, for having me on. I'm so glad that you invited me because this was a great conversation.
Wonderful. All right. Bye bye.
All right. Bye.